Today we are looking at Outriders, a game created by People Can Fly. And in my opinion, they have a great track record when it comes to games. Working on games like Gears of War and Bulletstorm, you can most certainly see the influence in Outriders. Outriders comes to us as a third-person looter shooter that can be played in single player or multiplayer. With other titles like Division in the same category as this one, let's go ahead and look at Outriders and what it has going for it, or in some cases what it doesn't have going for it. Let's break it down. So I'm going to come out and say it. The look and the feel of the game comes across as dated, from hilariously shaky cameras in the cutscenes to armor sets that look like you found them in the car boot sale. To be honest, I expected this. Already having played a demo religiously, I knew what to expect and what to see. Now, one thing I can say is that the special effects are dramatic, making you feel like an actual superhero. Visually speaking though, it's no Destiny, but Outriders doesn't pull any punches when it comes to obliterating the enemy into dust particles. Now, I've mostly played the Pyromancer, which is the fire-based class, and there are a couple of other classes as well, but those I'll explain in gameplay section. Playing as the Pyro gave me a gratifying feeling every time I set someone ablaze, with audio and visual feedback to boot. I found the dynamic peculiar, as the rest of the game looks like it was made 7 years ago, but the special moves and the abilities have next-gen levels of fidelity for some reason. Very peculiar. Not sure if that's a limitation with the engine, or maybe just someone turned the dial up on the special effects knob and forgot about the textures and the 3D modeling. Let's go back to cutscenes. Seriously though, I actually felt like I was watching a B-movie scene, often at times making me feel incredibly uncomfortable due to the shaky cam. Now, this can somewhat be mitigated by turning up the cutscene FPS limit, but not everyone has the luxury of a powerful graphics card, and I really think that it should be addressed in future patches so that the experience isn't hindered for other players. When talking about the dated look I mentioned earlier, everything from the models to the textures really highlighted that this is no Destiny and that you should temper your expectations in that regard. However, the locales that you visit sometimes have absolutely stunning vistas, but I sometimes found myself stopping just to admire the various anomalies scattered throughout the game. Plentiful vistas are scattered throughout the game, and the best way to enjoy them is actually turning the camera away from the level that you need to traverse. All of these levels feel very cookie cutter in shape, feeling unnatural and often hard to navigate even when you're leaning into your typical gaming navigation sensibilities, and they generally serve a purpose in a linear experience. I get that. It would have been nice to see a more open-ended way to go through the levels, and in turn allowing us to appreciate the level design from a different perspective. Let's start with the good. When Outriders gets going in its core gameplay loop, it actually feels like it's in its element. The premise is you have 4 classes: Pyromancer, Technomancer, Devastator, and Trickster, all providing their own unique take to combat. All classes have 8 skills and a skill tree. The 8 skills, 3 of which you take into combat actively, these will make up the crux of your gameplay. And if I'm honest, the skill tree mostly provides numerical buffs that don't really change the way you play. They just make you statistically stronger, which is a missed opportunity when there are so many variables in this game. However, saying that, most of the fun from combat comes from mods, which basically change the way you use your abilities. For example, on the screen you'll notice I use a skill called Heatwave basically all the time. Now there is a set bonus which allows you to gain 50% anomaly power per enemy hit with that move. Anomaly power is basically skill power, so you can essentially get ludicrous amounts of damage, making sure that you use that ability whenever possible. One of my favorite mods is the Thermal Bomb mod, which allows you to cause chain reactions whenever I kill an enemy. Eventually, in my playthrough, I got the ability to hit 2 enemies with that Thermal Bomb mod, which essentially changed the whole dynamic. It was amazing. The weapons which you get, which fall into your standard weapon classes, the LMG, the SMG, sniper, assault rifle, handgun, and shotgun, also provide their own mods which allow ridiculous things like summoning a meteor from the sky every 4 seconds to do insane damage in a 3.5 meter radius, or creating a dome which slows down time whenever you kill an enemy, making you feel like Neo from the Matrix. This enticing amalgamation of mods really allows you to flex on the enemies, utterly obliterating them at the higher levels of play, provided you have the right build. Another great thing about these mods is that they can be attached to any weapon or armor of the same type by dismantling the gear that you don't need. At several points in my playthrough, I made a tough decision to scrap legendaries that I'd found from the demo in order to have several strong mods throughout my story. The skills in these mods really impressed me, adding a whole new layer to the gameplay, despite the gameplay loop being somewhat repetitive. This was especially prevalent in the endgame, where a new map opens up and essentially allows you to do special missions that involve not so special tasks like defending an area or surviving waves. And even talking about this makes me bored because the enemies are so spongy in those expeditions, and the expeditions have a similar tier system to the main game, which incrementally changes the loot drop rate and the enemy difficulty as you go along. The only problem being at the higher end, like I mentioned, the enemies are bullet sponge central. It was only after getting a near perfect build that I started to have more fun, as the weaker enemies would die faster, but the elites and the bosses have such inflated health pools, it's like you'll often find yourself losing interest after you practically unload your entire ammo reserve into them. I'm not even joking. This is only amplified by the fact that there's a time restriction which can cap your loot drop rate and make farming a tedious ordeal. Luckily for me, I had a good friend in my party, which made this slog much more manageable. Duos seems to be the sweet spot when it comes to multiplayer. Trios causes an ungodly spike in difficulty and sponginess, and is probably best avoided until the devs balance it out a bit more. Solo is viable, but in the endgame at tier 15, it's not optimal, as you need more crowd control and ability stacking to do some really massive damage. I knew going into this that the endgame would be a standard affair, with longevity being average at best. Even the devs have mentioned that there'll be no DLC or future content, so enjoy this game for what it is. I can't promise you that they're going to release more content, so this is kind of a one and done game. If you can't get to the last tier, don't sweat it so much, you're not missing out on much. Writing and story. So for the most part, the main story was acted really well and it was voiced incredibly well, but the story itself is so bog standard that you can pretty much predict the ending. It's a standard journey, and it doesn't help that the main character has a personality of a brick wall, literally has no emotion, and I found it incredibly difficult to relate. I don't know if this was a writing problem or maybe that's just how the vision for the character was, but yeah, that needs some work. The premise is that this world is being ruined by an anomaly, which gives people superpowers and is slowly destroying the world, poisoning everything around it. You are playing as someone who is an altered, a superhuman being, and you are on a journey to discover the cause of this anomaly. Naturally, just like all humans do, we tend to ostracize people who are special, and you are treated as such going through the game. People don't really like you for your superpowers. It also doesn't help that your character is arrogant as hell and basically comes across as I actually love the world design though when I'm not playing the levels. And what I mean by this is that I mentioned this earlier in the gameplay section, that the level design is fairly linear and it's predictable and it's awkward, but the actual world and the backdrop is done completely and utterly brilliantly. They are beautifully done, they are incredibly varied, and it often drove me to push through the main story just so I could see a new area. Each area provided its own narrative and story, and it's such a shame that apart from the story, there isn't much that adds to this great universe. I was talking to a good friend and he mentioned that good sci-fi stories are few and far between, and I really believe that this was the case. Outriders shows glimpses of greatness in its story and some of its side characters. Actually, the story at some point is carried by that main cast of side characters, but is ultimately let down by poor writing and unmemorable villains. Side quests are practically fetch quests and are one and done conversations, not expanding on those characters at all. Side characters aren't fleshed out despite being the best part of the story, and in summary, the world looks beautiful, but the issue here is that there's a lack of anything compelling to keep you attached and invested in the story in a world that's very surface level and superficial. how does it run? So I counted 66 total crashes, disconnects and errors. To be frank, it's unacceptable for a game to be in this state in this day and age. We are consumers and not beta testers. It was an incredibly frustrating experience to be logged out every 10 minutes, losing items, progress and time. On multiple occasions, the game was unplayable and I was watching the Twitter page religiously looking for updates of when I could get back online and continue reviewing for you guys. To be honest, I don't know why this is an online only game. It's mostly single player, and when you can get into the game it works fine, but you need to do a host of other things in order to get a smooth experience. For example, you probably need to turn down your post-processing and shadows to medium, otherwise the game chugs. It chugs at 4K and 2K. I'm surprised as I have a 3080, which supposedly is one of the best cards on the market. After a little bit of tweaking, the game ran in a playable state, but I still had issues. Earlier on, there were micro stuttering issues and required a patch and a new driver, and I just don't understand how games are released like this. It's really frustrating for the consumer, as I mentioned. Honestly, I know it sounds like I'm trashing this game, but the performance issues really hindered my ability to play and enjoy it. And if you don't believe me as a small YouTuber, just go and check other big channels like Angry Joe. He had an angry rant on it, and this is what I'm talking about. The games shouldn't release in this particular way. We are deserving of a certain standard, and in order to play these games and they want our money, we need to have a certain quality control. When you can get to the crux of the game, it plays really well, and it's generally very fun to play if it runs well.
What do we have here?
Sound design. The soundtrack for the game is actually surprisingly great for a smaller game. The music sets the pace for the fight well, but in order to actually hear it, you need to turn down the gun sounds. The abilities have an audible punch, making you feel like a superhero flowing from one enemy to the next. The confluence of gun sounds and abilities hitting at the right cadence can really create an experience that makes the combat flow. I do have a couple of critique points though. One is the sound of the imbued bullets. So you have an ability that can put an element on your weapon, and that sound is the same regardless of the gun. It gets really grating on the ears, especially when a teammate has an LMG and all you hear is 90% of the run with that sound in the background, and it's very frustrating. It generally sounds like plastic is being shredded on a cheese grater, and the guns don't really have any distinct sounds that identifies them from one gun or another, so really everything sounds the same. And I know it's unfair to compare it to the likes of Destiny, but Destiny truly had individual weapons with their own sounds in which you could identify them in the thick of battle. Other than that though, I enjoyed the sound design for the gameplay and most of the special effects and abilities. The voice acting of the main cast, with the exception of the protagonist, is incredibly well done with a sense of believability. There are some key moments that highlight the struggle of the people living in the world. It's a shame that the side characters don't have the same level of quality to the voice work, and you can really notice the sharp contrast as you go about doing your Outrider activities. I mentioned this earlier, but I feel like it's a missed opportunity, and hopefully the People Can Fly studio can learn from this going forward. Hey guys, hope you enjoyed the review. As always, I enjoyed making it. Now, Outriders had the potential to be something amazing. That mod system that they have laid a good foundation to be able to play the game any way you want. There was a lot of opportunity for versatility, and I think in the future, if they plan to do any DLCs, I'd like to see that mod system expanded. Ultimately though, the game was let down by performance issues and a weak storyline. I could never find myself being immersed into the story just because it was lackluster in some of its writing and the way it was portrayed on the screen. Now I'm going to give Outriders an Amber Light. For those of you who are new to the channel, I'm going to place that rating on the next screen so you can use it as a point of reference for future videos. Now, thanks again for tuning in. I've been getting a lot of private messages saying that people love the channel, and I'm also getting a lot of support on YouTube, so thank you for helping it grow. I really do hope to push out lots more reviews. like I said before in the previous video, there are so many games coming out and I'm honestly looking forward to playing them all. So please, if you do like the content, leave a thumbs up, and if you love the content, subscribe so you know when my videos are coming out. It really helps as a small YouTuber. Thanks again for tuning in. This was the Bearded Breakdown, and I'll see you on the next breakdown. See ya.